This is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services, and today we are continuing our Cricos 101 series, and we are talking about enrollments. Now, enrollments is definitely one of the places where it becomes a little bit more complicated than doing a domestic fee-for-service enrollment, but it probably has similar layers of complexity to if you are doing, let's say, for example, an apprentice enrollment where you've got an ASIN and potentially a state funding body involved, or where you're running state funding programs, for example, for job seekers. And some of the requirements work out to be basically very the same as well. So what this boils down to is this then kind of follows on from your marketing, where you've provided a lot of really good information for the students. And within the enrollment section, what we're looking for is to make sure that the student is actually fully informed and that they understand a lot of these things, which are then going to follow up when you go into student orientation, which is something that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks. So when we go specifically into standard 2, what we're looking for is that registered providers have to recruit responsibly and ensure overseas students are appropriately qualified for the course that they are seeking to enroll in. They have to have sufficient information to to enable them to make an informed decision about studying with their chosen registered provider. So for this one, registered providers have to make a range of current, comprehensive, and plain English information easily available for students in relation to course details, tuition and non-tuition fees, ensure that overseas students have sufficient English language requirements, which we're going to talk about today, and that you've got a really clear policy for recognition of prior learning or course credit. Okay, so some of the key things that I wanted to document on there is that information needs to be available in plain English. So this is where we see things like a copy and paste from training.gov, a list of units of competency, and there's not a lot of information in there in relationship to, in plain language, what are you doing in this course? And how is this course going to run? So, easy things about course duration. So this course runs over a year. You're going to do 4 terms of 10-week terms, and you'll be required to attend school 2 full days a week and do 4 hours of home study every single week. Plain information on if you have to do work placement. This qualification requires you to do 38 complete food service periods, 160 hours in an aged care center, 300 hours in a childcare environment. So, and you are responsible for sourcing that placement, or the college will help you and support you in finding that placement, or the college will provide you with a placement, okay? Any of those sorts of things, but it needs to be understood by the student. If you were to ask the student, how does the course run? They need to be able to give you some of that basic information, okay? So having information in plain language is really important. Now, some of the other things that we maybe touched on last time is that you are responsible for ensuring that the students have got sufficient skills to be able to participate in the course, okay? They've got sufficient English language proficiency. Now, that's going to come down to the language requirements from the Department of Homeland Affairs, where they're very clear on what IELTS scores you need to have. There's a couple of different English assessments that are available, but it's very clear the levels that the students have to have. If they don't have that level, they have to participate in so many weeks of ELICOS, okay? So that's the first part is like your English assessment levels, what you have to have from your English assessment levels. But they also have to have educational qualifications or work experience sufficient to enroll in the course. Now, this is always where I think it's really interesting how RTOs do or don't go about assessing that information. For me personally, my RTOs, I always recommend what's called kind of like a suitability discussion or a suitability assessment, where we talk about some of the things in the course. The amount of students enrolling in commercial cookery that don't want to touch meat, okay, that don't want to eat meat or eat seafood. If you are enrolling as a chef, the students need to understand that they are going to have to work with raw meat. as part of the qualification. So it's important that you're giving the students that information, that they're going to need to be able to stand for potentially like long periods of time, like 8-10 hour shifts. You know, if they've got a really bad back, that's something that you need to be aware of when you're going into this qualification. If they are vegan, if they refuse to touch meat, that's not gonna, it's going to be a massive barrier in as to how you're actually going to manage that in the qualification. And you really do need to decide whether or not a student is necessarily suitable for that. If they are refusing to touch meat, if they're refusing to eat any of the products, if they can't taste anything, you know, how are you going to get around that in relationship to actually ensuring evidence, you know, that there is sufficient evidence there that the student could be a chef. You know, yes, they may be able to be a chef in a vegan restaurant, but the qualification requires them to be able to produce quality products in meat, seafood, you know, poultry, all of this sort of stuff. How are you going to manage that? If they're working with kids, do they like kids? You know, are they capable of getting a working with children check? You know, this is something that we've seen in other places. You know, we've had students being referred through job active programs, and question number one is, you know, are you eligible for a police clearance and a working with children check? The answer is no. Well, it's like, well, we're kind of at a stopping point at that for individual support or for you know, for aged care. Vaccination status comes in for certain qualifications and things like that. So it's important to do a suitability assessment as to whether or not the student holistically is going to be appropriate for the qualification. And there's going to be some students who are not going to be appropriate for certain qualifications, and they need to have that information beforehand, you know, before they make that decision. So, you know, you need to have a very clear process for how you're going to manage this. If your only assessment is we're just going to check that they have the money and that they've got an IELTS score that's sufficient, that's not really making sure that your students are suitable for the qualification. It's certainly not making sure that they're making an informed decision about how the course is going to run. So it's really important that in your actual enrollment process, and for that you actually do need to have a written agreement with the students, so they go through an application process. So they apply, you then send out a written agreement which has a very, very clear information in relationship to how the qualification breaks down and what the fees are, and that's the tuition fees that we talked about last time. But also all of the additional fees as well. So, you know, any fees for uniforms, fees for equipment, fees for resources, late fees, administration fees. They need to have a very clear outline, not only of the amount that has to be paid, but when that information is going to be paid across that course as well. So this is like all of the different information that you will need to provide as part of that written agreement. I would strongly suggest that you really do review your written agreement carefully and make sure that there is a lot of good information in there. If you download the fact sheet for the National Code Standard 2, recruitment of an overseas student, it outlines all the different things that need to go into that written agreement. And again, when it goes in, it needs to go in plain language so that it can be understood by the student. And you're then going to reinforce all of that information when the student then does enroll and goes into you know, before they actually come into the course. Okay. Now, obviously, if you're just running an ELICOS course, there is no minimum English language proficiency, but for the vast majority of courses, like for your 500 visas and things like that, there are those clear standards on the Department of Homeland Affairs. If you Google DHA IELTS requirement visa 500, it will send you the link there, or I might try and get it and pop it in the comments section below. That's about it, guys. So again, you know, key takeaways from this: have a really strong written agreement, put everything in plain information, consider not only from an English language perspective, but from a suitability perspective, what makes a student suitable for your course, and make sure you have a process for assessing that in your recruitment and enrollment process. and you should be good to go. We are going to continue next time with how we go about orienting our international students and what should be covered in your student orientation. I hope you guys are finding this helpful. As usual, videos dropping every Wednesday and Sunday. Smash that like button. Make sure you subscribe and follow. Hit the notifications button so that you never miss an Anawire video. Thank you very much. My name is Lauren Hollows for Anawire Education Services.